the art of thinking beyond the obvious. And today I have my special guest. He's a seasoned executive driving innovation across logistics, banking, healthcare, and private. None other than Mr. Christopher Joy. Welcome, Mr. Christopher on Abstract Cafe. Can you please introduce more about yourself that I
Sure. So I'm President and CEO of Vantage Surgical Solutions, which is a healthcare services company. I'm also currently the vice chair of a $600 million local bank in Central Illinois. I sit on the board of Vantage Surgical Solutions, as well as other nonprofit boards in the area.
Yes, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Mr. Christopher, thank you. And my cheering squad is not working. I think yes. Thank you, Mr. Christopher. And today, let's talk about the being you, mentorship, and professional development, shaping the next generation of business leaders. So, Mr. Christopher, your career spans logistics, healthcare, private equity, manufacturing, and finance. Plus, you've been a young professor shaping your business leaders. That's an extraordinary range. Was there a through line that connected the seemingly different industry for you, or do you intentionally seek out diversity to build particular kind of expertise?
I think for me, I went into finance with the idea of being a business leader, which kind of puts me in a different group in finance because I'm more extroverted than most. But I think the skills that you drive in different aspects of the business, whatever industry that you're in, is very utilizable in other industries. I think so often people either don't want to take the risk to move from industry to industry, or they don't see the connection of how their skills are useful. And I think I've been able to transition through many industries, and there's always something to learn, right? But I think it's very possible to transition through different industries and utilize skills that you've learned in other roles.
You held the roles as a president and COO at Vantage Surgical Solutions, CFO at manufacturing companies, and senior cost manager, all while serving as a board director and academic. How did your understanding of leadership evolve as you move from functional roles like finance into broader executive and board responsibilities? How do you have to unlearn?
I do think it made me by far a better professor because I was
Mm.
actually using real world examples in my classes. We would deal with the issues that I was dealing with every day in manufacturing or in capital allocations, whatever that may be. But I think that anytime that you build an expertise in a functional area of business, including finance or even executive leadership, I think those skills, transition from one industry to the next. They don't perfectly align in every industry, but I think you can use those skills that you've learned to really advance yourself within different organizations.
Mr. Christopher, you describe yourself as someone with natural affinity for cultivating relationships while building consensus among diverse individuals. In industries as different as healthcare and manufacturing, what remains constant about how you build trust and alignment? What is your approach when stakeholders have competing interests?
So I think you have to be aware when someone has a conflicting interest with you, but we're an integrity first leader. That's how I believe that companies should be run. And I know that a lot of my colleagues kind of laugh at that and they say, well, shouldn't every business be run integrity first? But I think I would double down on it and suggest that if you aren't having to put yourself in awkward situations where you have to make active decisions about how to approach integrity, that you're not actually operating with integrity. You're just operating with what you think you should be doing in that particular role. And so I think that's what's a little bit different with how I approach work. And I think when you approach work that way, it enables you to have very transparent conversations with your team members. The other thing that I think is really beneficial for me is that in September of 2021, we sold to private equity, which gave me a nice liquidity event. And it really transitioned my focus away from how do I continue to build, you know, an organization for myself, and it transitions to how do I build the people who help me to be successful in my career.
Well said, Mr. Christopher. And you said that your leadership is defined by integrity, credibility, and passion for progress. Those words sounds great on paper, but what do they actually look like in practice? Can you share a moment when your integrity was tested, when the easy path was different from the right path?
Yeah, I mean, it can be as simple as, like when a customer wants you to cut somebody out of a deal in order to make it cheaper for them. Or it could be when a vendor is trying to get you to overprice something so that way they can make a greater commission on something. You just have to be willing to make those hard decisions. And if you know that you're going to do that in advance, it's so much easier to deal with the situations when they arise because you just say, look, that's not how we operate. We've had surgeons that have asked us to reimburse them for time that was foregone due to uh, an inconvenience on either our part or theirs, and we just choose to follow the rules, and that's true all the time. And when you do that, you learn that a lot of those questions kind of fall to the wayside. Like people don't even bother to ask after a while because they know the answer to the question before they ask. Does it cost us some business? I'm sure it does. I'm sure there's other companies out there that are willing to do that stuff. I don't know that our competitors do it, but I know for a fact that we don't.
So, you've driven productions, optimize operations, and generate substantial returns for investors. But you've also been an educator and mentor. How do you balance the hard metrics of business success with the offer work of developing people? Do you see those competing priorities, or do they reinforce each other?
I think it's both. But I think in general, people like to be challenged. I think they like to actually build value and they like to be able to calculate the value that they build and therefore understand what they're creating for an organization. And so I think having high expectations, but having them built in a way that someone can see what they bring to the table and how much value that they create year in and year out gives them an ability to kind of attach themselves to that value. And then that also sometimes causes them to leave the organization. They may say, hey, I don't want to get paid X for all this value that I'm creating. I'm going to go somewhere else and find somebody that's willing to pay me more. And that's okay. I think that it's important for all of us to figure out this, you know, the basically the process that you go through in your career. It's not linear for everyone, right? And so I think you want what's best for your people, and you are transparent and you help them in any way that you can. And if they think that they can do better somewhere else, then we just encourage them and hope the best for them.
Definitely hope for the best for them. You spent over a decade revolutionizing logistics at Advantage Surgical Solutions, making specialty procedures more accessible and convenient. Take us inside that transformation. What was the biggest operational challenge you faced, and how do you solve it in a way that others had not?
So we invested in an IT system, and Primarily, what was happening was I showed up for a sales meeting one day at a hospital that was closed. And so I called into the office and I was like, what is going on? I'm supposed to be meeting at this facility. The CRM that we had said that it's at this location. Um, w- you know, where is it? And they said basically, well, it's across town. They've rebuilt in a new location. And I said, well, how is it that we can go there every week, but nobody bothered to update the address in the system? And then I turned around and called accounting because I thought, oh, well, they're in a silo as well. So I said, where do you send your invoices to? And they said, the location that I was at. I said, well, that's funny because the hospital is definitely closed here. And so what we realized was the operations team was able to update the information so that way they could show up for cases, but they didn't inform any of the other silos. And we had this idea, we need to come up with one source of truth. And that's basically how we built our system. And so now when someone is calling on a hospital, it's the exact same name, address, contacts for the sales team as it is for the operations team, as it is for accounting. And that was kind of one of the big changes that enabled us to move forward. And then obviously, as you get everything into a system, you can start to optimize. And so instead of running everything out of Effingham, Illinois, where we were based, we started to satellite and run a hub and spoke strategy throughout the country. And so we would basically build a hub, in a regional area, and then we would have spokes that were more than 180 miles away from the hub. And so it just enabled us to kind of start to hire staff in places that could consistently work. And we would build up enough business in that particular region to support them. And then obviously you've got people from the hub that have to fill in some of the gaps.
Mr. Christopher, you've been involved in private equity transactions, identifying promising ventures and generating substantial returns. For an entrepreneur or founder listening who might seeking investment, what do you look for beyond the numbers? What tells you that venture and the person leading it is worth backing?
I think a lot of it comes down to the systems of the organization, not necessarily IT systems, but just the systems in general. Can they repeat the transaction over and over and over again and get it right every single time at the lowest level of the organization? I think that tells you whether or not that business is scalable and repeatable. And if it only builds around one particular person, that indicates that that person is the linchpin of that organization, and without it, it would be very, very difficult to operate. And then I think beyond that, it's, are they willing to step aside and kind of let their team run? If they're the only ones that are making decisions within the organization, then it really causes me concern about whether the organization would be as effective without them. And a lot of times, when we acquire organizations, the founders of those organizations don't usually continue on with them. And so that's really important for us to be able to say, do we believe that this organization can continue to be as effective as it is today without them leading it?
Mr. Christopher, you've served as the adjunct professor at Eastern Illinois University, mentoring aspiring business leaders. What drew you to teaching after decades of boardroom and C suite? What did you discover about yourself when you step into the classroom?
I think the biggest thing that I wanted to provide to the students that I didn't necessarily feel like I always got myself was just the real world experience. I remember graduating from undergrad and taking my first job. And when I showed up for work, I was like, oh my gosh, really have no idea how this actually works. Theoretically, yes, it was great, but I got hired in as a leader of an accounting program right off the bat. And my concern was, I don't really know how to do any of this stuff. And so it was really helpful, I feel like, to be able to take real cases back into the classroom. And then, there were a couple of situations where the students would get hung up and they'd just say, I understand what you're saying, but I can't visualize it. And so sometimes we would just go out to the manufacturing plant and we would show, okay, so how do you split this person in two? You say that they're only charged half to this line and half to that line. Well, this is how we do that because they have responsibilities for both. Obviously, they're not doing both at the same time, but that they would not share all of their costs with one particular manufacturing line versus the other. And so my hope was is that they could then take some of that knowledge that wasn't just theoretical and walk into some place and be helpful, as opposed to me when I walked in and I was like, I really know nothing.
Well, thank you for sharing that story, Mr. Christopher. You mentored students and young professionals. What are the most common questions or concerns you hear from the next generation of business leaders? What are the answers about, and what do they most need to hear from someone who has walked the path?
I think the biggest thing that I encourage people to think about is the just sheer volume of businesses that are owned by baby boomers today. And they're all significantly past when they visualized that they would retire, and they really have no plan or process in place in order to do that. And I think if you have a well intentioned young individual that's willing to get their hands dirty for a couple of years, there are lots of business owners that are willing to figure out a way to transition ownership of their business in the best interest of both themselves and the new owner. And there's just a lot of employees out there who don't have a desire to take that responsibility, and that's fine. And we have lots of employees that maybe don't want that responsibility today, and that's fine as well. But I think for the person who has a desire to grow and has a desire to be successful, if they're willing to take a little bit of risk and they're willing to do it in a way that's educated and informed, that they can really add a lot of value both to themselves and to a person that's at that point in their career. And I just think that reminding people of that every time that I go and talk, I always tell them, I'm like, think about the businesses in your world that are the least exciting. Think about the things you would really not want to do if you had your choice. And a lot of those businesses build a lot of value, and it's because they're not exciting that nobody's chasing after them to buy them. And so there's a lot of opportunity out there where they could buy them at really inexpensive prices and make a lot of money in their life and have a fulfilled life also. The other thing that I encourage people is that bigger isn't always better. The more risk you take, obviously there's an opportunity to make more money, but there's also a lot of opportunities to fail. And when I remind people, yes, we were successful in transacting with private equity, but before that, we had millions of dollars of personal guarantees on equipment loans and lines that, the average person doesn't want to have. I didn't want to have it, and I don't think I'm average. I think that so often we like to paint a rosier picture around bigger organizations. And yes, they can be very successful and they can come with commas in that sales price, and that's great. But there's a whole lot of people that go into these businesses and they don't succeed in them. And then the failure that comes along with that, especially if you're in your middle of career and you've already saved up some retirement or you have some net worth, it can be very dangerous to enter into that world. So I always encourage people just to understand what they want, and then chase after it, and it may be in a place that they're not looking.
Very well said, Mr. Christopher. Beautifully articulated. You're known for your ability to build relationship and cultivate consensus among diverse individuals. In a world where business is increasingly transactional, what does authentic relationship building actually require? What is your approach when you are entering a new organization or industry when you don't yet have credibility?
I mean, I think when you're entering into a new industry, especially, it's important to know what you know and know what you don't. And if you can enable people to walk alongside you, the likelihood that you'll screw up something that's catastrophic is a lot less. And so I just encourage people that until they really understand, I think about when I first enter into a business until I transition out. When I first enter into a business, I really want to know what my team thinks about different ideas or decisions that have to be made. And as you get further and further into your time in that business, you are less concerned about what everybody thinks and more concerned about operational efficacy or efficiency, even to getting decisions done and keeping the business moving. But when you're new, it's important to take the time to not only to understand what's going on from different people's perspective, but also to allow people to have some say in what's going on in the business that they're entering into, and then mentoring them. It doesn't mean that when they say something that's crazy that you immediately say, okay, let's implement that. You just say, oh, okay, that's an interesting perspective. I haven't really considered it. And then off to the side, you have a conversation with them one on one where you're like, okay, this is what I think I heard you say, but I don't understand how that makes sense. Could you help me to further understand? And really dive into it. And I think you can help them then to visualize what your thought process is in regards to that, and maybe understand why it wouldn't make sense to do what they're trying to do. But I always try to do that off to the side so that way they don't feel like they're being attacked. And I do it in a way where I'm asking questions to understand, not necessarily dictating what it is that I'm trying to figure out. But the more questions that you ask, the more that they'll understand the thought process that you go through in making those same decisions. And it will help them to understand, okay, so he's not trying to throw me out on my rear end. He's actually trying to walk me through this process to understand how I should be thinking about these decisions. And a lot of times people just aren't trained. They get thrown into roles and people expect them to know what to do. And guess what? They don't. They do their
Mhm.
best. I really truly think that if you look at people in general and you say, I'm pretty sure this guy didn't come to work today so he could screw up this decision. And then when they make a bad decision, you help them to understand how you would look at it differently. But I would do it not by telling them, I would just ask them questions about their logic and about their process. And eventually, I think they'll come to understand that what you're thinking about this situation and what they're thinking about this situation is very different. And then having a conversation about how you approach things differently and how you think that that will help them in their approach as well. And after a while, consistency goes a long ways. If you approach a lot of your issues the same way over and over again with the same logic, your employees will also approach it with the same logic. And then even when they know that they don't want to know your answer because they want something else, they'll come to you and be like, well, I know that you're going to tell me this, but here's why I want this. Now, can you help me get to the answer where this is the outcome? And usually I'm like, no. But it does allow them kind of that flexibility to say, okay, I think you're going to logic to this answer, but I'd really like this other answer. Is there a way to get it done? And that's when you can have some deep conversations about what it is that you're trying to do and vision. I had a great example of this the other day. I had a sales rep that couldn't understand why we weren't going to bid a deal that he wanted. And I said, well, the vision of this organization is a highly technical component on site in surgery every day. And I said, explain to me how what you're trying to propose aligns with that vision. And he said, I don't want to have a person there. And I said, I understand. That's what I'm saying. Like the pitch that we sell to our own board is that there's a highly technical component on site in surgery every day. And you want it to not have a person, but that doesn't align with who we are as an organization. So why would we bid something that it doesn't align with who we are? And he said, okay, I understand now. I'm getting where you're coming from. And so it's those types of things where if you are consistent and you have those stated plans and objectives, you don't have to fight about whether something makes sense or not, because it's not about what I think versus what they think. It's like, no, this is what we are as a company. And it kind of helps to drive a lot of those decisions to where a lot of times I don't even hear about the thing. I mean, they may be frustrated and say, I really think we should have bid this, even though it doesn't, make sense per what our vision is. And that's fine. They can tell me that, but the problem is that the impact that it has in other parts of the organization are greater. And when you start to lose who you are, and lose who your customer is, then you become, nothing to nobody, unfortunately. So, so I think that's how I try to drag people through the process and get to understand it from my perspective, and then just be very consistent over and over and over again.
Consistency is the key, people. One of the ingredients to success. So, Mr. Christopher, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, because my abstract essay is already in sixth season. Abstract poetry in third season, of course, my book 101 review in sixth season too. Comedy 101 fourth season, and my food 101 in sixth season as well. Geography 101 love letters, movie 101 review, music 101 our fifth season, science 101, sex 101 fourth season, trivia 101, motivation 101, spiritual awakening 101, entrepreneurship 101, law 101, mental health 101, coaching 101, and of course, my Bible verses 101 are my baby podcast. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Mr. Christopher, if you could leave one message with the next generation of business leaders, whether they are students in your classroom, entrepreneurs seeking investment, or young professionals trying to find their path, what would it be and what do you want them to understand about leadership, about success, and about what meant to be build life of impact?
Yeah, so I think the thing that I would tell you is that just like I didn't get here on my own, you won't get to where you want to be on your own. Find somebody who has the skills, the knowledge, and the experience that you want to have, and just ask them if they're willing to mentor you. I think one of the biggest things that I noticed today is people don't ask. And most of the guys that I know that have my level of experience or higher would gladly stop at a moment's notice and give you feedback and help you to grow into who you want to be. And so, if you don't use your resources in a way that benefits you, then it's unfortunate, because I think there are plenty of people out there that want to help you to grow into who you want to be.
Yes, people ask, and it will be given to you. So, Mr. Christopher, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your business, your projects, or anything you want to promote on Abstract Essay?
Yeah, so if you want to find out more about me, go to swingceo.com. That's swingceo.com. It connects all of my business and entrepreneurial efforts, as well as my consulting, and would love to interact with you there.
Definitely. And people, let's support Mr. Christopher because if you support him, for sure, more and more empowering projects like this to rise. So, Mr. Christopher, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Maricam people, see you soon.